is Nathan Nestle. I'm the CARP Library Fellow, Public Programs Coordinator for Studio X, the Hub for Extended Reality at the University of Rochester. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This series is made possible by Kathy McMurrin-Murray and the National Science Foundation as part of the Interdisciplinary Graduate Training in Science, Technology, and Applications of Augmented and Virtual Reality at the University of Rochester. I would like to thank Kavya Pearlman for joining us today. Kavya, known as the Cyber Guardian in XR circles, is the founder and CEO of the XR Safety Initiative, a global nonprofit that promotes privacy, security, and ethics in immersive environments. Kavya has previously advised Facebook or Meta on third-party security risks during the 2016 US presidential elections and worked as the head of security for Second Life by Linden Lab. She's an award-winning cybersecurity professional and has pioneered security awareness in the Metaverse and many baseline security and privacy standards for XR. Kavya has founded the CyberXR Coalition that now focuses on diversity and inclusion and the cross-section of cybersecurity and XR, helped launch a trustworthy XR news platform, ReadyHackerOne, established a medical XR advisory council, and Metaverse Reality Check, the MRC. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat. We will have a Q&A session at the end. Lastly, this session is being recorded and will be available to you later on the Studio X website. With that, I'll turn it over to Kavya.
Thanks, Nefli, and hello, everyone. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for having me here. I know I have about 30 minutes, and I probably won't do justice to that much time. I'm going to try to pack as much knowledge as I can, because past few years, that's what I've been sort of busy curating, this type of knowledge. But today, you know, technology can really be used both for good and bad. And so in the coming 30 minutes or so, I'm really going to draw this, you know, my lived experiences and how they changed my perception and my risk profile and my relationship with technology. So I hope I impart some knowledge and some key takeaways and you benefit from it. So let's begin. This is a magnificent poem. It's from Rumi, who is one of those poets from back in early 1800s or so. One of my favorite poets. It goes something like this. What is to be done, O Muslim? For I do not recognize myself. I am neither Christian nor Jew, nor Jabber, nor Muslim. I'm not of the East, nor of the West, nor of the land, nor of the sea. I'm not of the nature's mint, nor of the circle's heavens. I'm not of the earth, nor water, nor of air, nor fire. I'm not of the empyrean, nor of the dust, nor of existence, nor of entity. I'm not of India, nor of China, nor of Bulgaria, nor of Saxon. I'm not of the kingdom of Iraqian, nor of the country of Khorasan. I'm not of this world, nor of the next, nor of the paradise, nor of the hell. And why do I say this poem? Because the poem is called Who Am I? And it really just revolves around identity and my personal identity and who kind of owns the identity. And this poem would have been applicable for a deep philosophical reflection to really find out, like, who are we? Or to really just surrender to that we are nobody, we're from nowhere. So let me just kind of quickly draw this from my personal experiences and tell you a little bit about, you know, who really I am. I grew up in India, and two of my brother sisters are missing from this picture, and they're probably at school or something. So in India, I was just, you know, a very odd child amongst the four. My parents had a really tough time kind of dealing with me because I was a nerd who always wanted to study, but as a you know, girl, I was supposed to like cook, clean, and learn all that. Didn't happen. I kept on studying. Fast forward, I also aspired to move to America. And in about 2007, I moved to the United States and became a hairstylist. And here, I'm only using an avatar, even though I did take sort of a hijabi, non-hijabi pictures because I grew up as Hindu. When I moved to America, I converted to Judaism, became a hairstylist, and worked for about 5-6 years doing just that. And fast forward, I realized that that's not who I wanted to be. So I changed my religion from Hindu to Jewish. That was back then. And then I, changed all of myself. Like I changed my career. I've studied master's in network security. And then I realized if I'm going to do tech, let's move to the Valley. Fast forward, I found myself doing third-party security at Facebook. That's me holding the, unlike sign right next to the workplace at one point. That was because in 2016, everybody knows what happened. It was like a very interesting, scandal that I had sort of like a front row seat to it because I was a third-party security advisor there. And one of the things that I do want to talk about is as I joined Facebook, I had not realized, I'd not really publicly declared that I've become hijabi. But when I joined it, I was under social pressure and I posted a whole bunch of pictures on Facebook because I had to have a Facebook account. Anyhow, that account creation and that disclosure, like that posting a couple of hijabi pictures, led the Facebook AI to tell all my Make India Great Again relatives to come after me, give me death threats and whatnot. So my identity, of course, by choice or whatever changed, but I didn't have a choice to disclose it to people myself. It was disclosed through some AI. And then I started to kind of own up to it. And I was like, you know what the hell? I'm hijabi. I didn't go to India for a while because I couldn't. It was dangerous for me to go there. But in the meantime, right after Facebook, I became the head of security at Linden Lab. But if you went over to Linden at that time and asked anybody, hey, I want to meet Kavya, they wouldn't know because nobody knew me as Kavya. I was Maya. And most people had only seen a virtual reality avatar or a Second Life avatar. So in real life, I was this person, but I was really just this person. As you can see, sort of, by choice, again, the identity sort of changed. What I really was this person in my mind, trying to figure out, even back then, I helped adopt them, federal level cybersecurity framework, and try to really do things that, people didn't care about at that time. Trying to figure out like how to combat harassment in virtual reality. It wasn't a thing back then, but this is something that I lived and was concerned about. This is me in VR actually. And later on though, and this is another, your identity changes. I was kind of demanding privacy, safety, cybersecurity, all these things, along with some of the compliance specific requirements, at which point I was terminated. I was terminated on the day when I was receiving like a 4th award for being top 40 under 40 business executive. And I think you can see it on my face. I'm like ashamed, guilty, shame, just a lot of mixed emotions, but I'm really just angry. Like that was one of the primary emotions because, how many awards does a woman have to win to finally get some respect and, have them to abide by things that I was talking about. Anyhow, fast forward, this thing kind of moved over. I started XRSI, and then I started to really do a lot of virtual reality talks and podcasts and stuff. And now I'm kind of known as the cyber guardian, who is really trying to help protect the industry, safeguard virtual augmented mixed reality using, XRSI as the platform. Back in the days when I first started XRSI 2019, as you can see, amongst many of the XR, influencers, I thought of my voice as the unheard voices of XR. So it's really nice to be here, coming from, all that background to being just a completely unheard voices of XR in 2019. I was still the same person, be like, hey, anybody knows this gaze data is going to be a problem, along with all these other people that were just like really concerned, and we still are. However, our voices are being heard now, so that's kind of really nice to come to. So let's switch back to just to level set. What the hell is XR? Because extended reality to me this makes more sense because we are really just extending our reality into a new dimension using various different methodologies, whether it is virtual reality, which is full immersion and a completely digitally coded environment that you utilize some of the glasses, goggles to view that. Or it is augmented reality where you can, augment or overlay some of these digital contents on real world. Or it is mixed reality in a sense where you can not just augment and interact, but you can manipulate real world environment, such as like picking up a forklift using some kind of VR, AR glasses. So this XR, however, why is it interesting to me? To look at it like all this identity and all this data that we are kind of putting out there. And I give the example of what happened to my data or my identity. This is what happened to a lot of Americans in 2016. And I'm going to quickly play some of the blurb from, this is the former CEO, Alexander Nix of Cambridge Analytica. And here he claims what really is going on. This is pre-US presidential election.
Level, where we have somewhere close to 4,000 or 5,000 data points on every adult in the United States. Finally, addressable ad technology. This is the ability to take all this offline data and to match it to drive communications. Blanket advertising. Blanket advertising, the idea that 100 million people receive the same piece of direct mail, the same television advert, the same digital advert, is dead. My children will certainly never ever understand this concept of mass communication. Today, communication is becoming ever increasingly targeted. It's being individualized for every single person in this room. So you will no longer be receiving adverts on products and services that you don't care about. Rather, you'll only receive adverts that not only are on the products and services, or in the case of elections, issues that you care about most, but that have been nuanced in order to reflect the way you see the world. We're able to match offline data to cookies to drive digital advertising, social media banners and the like. We can obviously use this data to inform direct mail purchases. So a husband in a household can receive a piece of mail, but his wife can receive a different piece of mail, possibly even on the same issue.
Something to point out here is he's talking about these traditional media devices and the traditional media, and this is 2016. We didn't have virtual reality back then. So that's 5,000 data points. It's just readily available. Everybody's got it now.
Of all probably is the fact that we can take this data and match it to set-top box viewing data. That's television or cable data. Every time you watch TV, the programs that you're watching are being recorded, and that information is being sent back to your cable provider. And we can match what you watch in a way that we can begin to select programs to advertise in that have the highest density of the target audience that we're trying to reach. This not only dramatically reduces the cost of your advertising, but of course improves the return on investment.
So anyhow, in the name of cost, in the name of return of investment, what is really going on is influencing Americans' mind using the same data that social media companies either collect or they sell or all that stuff. Why is that interesting?
Well, we have somewhere.
Okay, let me just move this way. Yeah. So in 2018, Stanford University conducted this research where they established that within 20 minutes of virtual reality simulation, now you can collect over 2 million data points. Now think about what was done with the 5,000 data points, and this is way more. And this was 2018. We've now got way more sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithms that are actually making decisions for humans' behavior. Some of the algorithms are already being used to potentially select interview candidates, even to the extent of renting people houses or whether they should be given insurance and whatnot. So back then, we are still talking about personally identifiable data, but based on XRSI research and some of the things that we've been kind of figuring out to address these challenges, what we're really, really concerned about is the biometrically inferred data. So it's not just that now somebody knows I'm hijabi based on my head movement, my eye, my gaze, pupil dilation, all this stuff. There's a lot of characteristics that can be attributed, which is way beyond what was actually used in 2016 election period or anything before, even after that. This is way more sophisticated data, which can actually quantify your cognitive load, whether you're tired, you're not tired, you're, even the extent of like, are you looking at something in a loving way or angry or sexual arousal, or all these kind of like mental workload. So what happens when this kind of a data ends up in the hands of, let's say, your boss, your, any kind of provider? So there is, of course, the gate data. That's also, any kind of data, any inferences. That's where the key is, the inferences. And that's why we call it sort of biometrically inferred data. It's not just the facial structure. It's what you can attribute off of it. We already know that based on your typing pattern, one can actually attribute how fast your multiple sclerosis is progressing. Imagine if those type of medical information now is in the hands of developers, insurance providers, and they could potentially deny you coverage. And here is what's really like, the everyday AR glasses have way more avenues to collect all this other data, tracking and recording cameras, which is one thing. Now we got bidirectional speakers, all kinds of eye tracking, optics, projection, all these other amazing stuff that we, will look forward to experience the new era of digital computing is still tracking a lot of things, and it's going to continue to. So welcome to the new era of constant reality capture, where somebody like me, or, we could use these type of devices to potentially, a couple of weeks ago, Meta, which previously was Facebook, also talked about, their AI assistants being part of these augmented reality glasses, use of self-supervised learning to potentially attribute what a human really wants. In a way, it's a good thing, but in other ways, it can be really used to undermine democracies, which we have already seen before, but this is a whole another level. When we say we live in the post-truth era, this kind of a data collection is going to lead us to be living in post-reality era, where we are no longer able to potentially distinguish what's real, what's not. And that is really true for children because they have this undeveloped mind. I could totally see a day where a child will be like, no, mommy, dolphins can fly. I have seen them. Argue with that. So, seeing could no longer be believing. And it's already starting to happen. I mean, Kim Kardashian, I don't know if some of you remember, but Kim Kardashian's father was put into a holographic form where he was like, Kanye is the best husband. Now think about, if some older president of some of the countries could start to then come and campaign for these presidential campaigns, then that could be very influential and useful, but also very manipulative. So what does the future look like? It looks great. And I don't want to actually play this video, so I'm going to skip through it. In the future, we are going to be able to potentially teleport ourselves, play all these augmented reality games. And this is already starting to happen. There is one particular statement that I say, I never really agree with Zuckerberg, except for this one time, that we should all be teleporting and not transporting, also because, our planet is kind of dying. So we need to figure out ways that are not so carbon, intensive, not so, heavy on the climate. So these kinds of things, basically allowing children to play, visiting tourist site, communicating with family in this type of a holographic form, and just, being able to be present with other people without having to go there is something really amazing to look forward to. But of course, with all these kinds of things, this teleportation and this contextualized AI that will constantly monitor us and watch for what we like, what we don't like, there's so many things that also should be considered. It brings about new risks of privacy. We haven't even solved that in traditional media. Now there is this whole another era of privacy, like constant reality capture. What are we going to do? What about safety? And safety is way beyond just your physical safety. This is why XRSI emphasizes on safety, because would you feel safe if you're hacked? So cybersecurity sort of is a part of that safety mechanism when it comes to XR, is if you have to safeguard not just your networks, node servers, you have to safeguard your potential, your environment, your surrounding. You have to safeguard your identity. What happened with me could happen with anybody. And I'm pretty sure in the Internet Archive, there's still some pictures out there that I wouldn't like to potentially put out there. They're not with a hijab, but they're already out there. They're already in some cloud or something. So what do we do when this happens? Like, our regulatory, is regulation the response, the answer? And it seems to me regulations are not quite here, but the innovations are happening already, which is why, and I'm going to skip through this as well, we started to put together a framework in place in about 2020 after a bunch of these research with a lot of community from a multidisciplinary perspective. What we came up with is called a XRSI privacy and safety framework. And currently the version 2 development is going on for this safety framework. You can potentially note down this, and I can share that afterwards as well. But if you want to get engaged with this kind of a research that's still going on, we only kicked off on March 1st. And why this is unique is traditionally cybersecurity or any other framework has never taken into account human in the loop. What about harassment and bullying and all these other, human related risk? What about addiction to these technologies, disinformation that has a graver impact on society, and it impacts various societies differently. So disinformation over here in America may cause somebody distress, but the very same disinformation in India could cause somebody death. Like their entire generation of, generation could die. That's, depending on the culture. So we're trying to take this multidisciplinary global sort of approach where we also address these type of risks. And to do so, I mean, this is kind of what this framework looks like. You potentially assess what could go wrong, inform people, and not just with the check the box policy. This is so that at some point, this could potentially be either a framework to inform regulators or a framework to tell Facebook and other big tech corporations that are trying to claim a stake in the metaverse or the next iteration of the internet, how they should be proceeding with it. There's a clear element of autonomy because, think about if you combine brain-computer interfaces with this, then all of our thoughts could be up for grabs. And that kind of data is something that if it's in the hands of doctors even, you need respect, you need your rights, you need protection for your autonomy, because are you really the person making the decision or is it the algorithm? And then another thing is harm prevention, because just like I said, seeing is no longer believing, but you can't unsee things, especially for children. So you need to really prevent harm. And these are the kind of things we haven't seen before. So this is community-driven kind of framework. And I just wanted to share with you all the timeline. We intend to conclude this framework by 2023. And currently it's open to all. Even a philosopher is welcome, so we could reflect together on the idea, what happens to our identity in a fast forward, like someday when we decide to upload it to a wafer, a silicon wafer, where we decide to connect to human brains, then what happens to our identity? What happens to the consciousness? What is consciousness? And that's why, I started with Rumi's sort of poem, is because it really we need to deeply reflect on who we really are. And that all these things need to be captured to further, address these new challenges of privacy, safety, and security, and of course, identity. And it's not just that. There is attacks that XRSI senior advisors and a couple of other, actually, if I'm not wrong, very recently, it was Rutgers University who has also come up with some of the novel virtual reality attacks, which basically indicates that the attack surface especially when it comes to cybersecurity attacks, is no longer your nodes, your network, your server. It's now your living room, because with these type of attacks, one could, this kind of tracker attack or human joystick attack, by shrinking or disabling boundaries, the researchers were able to move a person in certain direction without their knowledge. They could overlay contents with what they're seeing without them even knowing, or sometimes knowing, but it could be like a, overlaying on top of their vision. That could be like a form of ransomware, where you're like, no, I won't let it go unless you pay me X amount of dollars or something. So these type of new things need to be researched further, because we do want to stay ahead of the bad guys. There is other challenges, such as ethical challenges. Women go into virtual reality, and this has happened personally to me. Back when I was head of security, somebody actually came right to my face, and I was in VR, and it feels very intimate and very real. And they started to say all kinds of horrible things that I was just not prepared for. And for someone who was spending about 8.5 hours in VR back then, I didn't go into VR for like 3 days. It's like a huge deal. Like I was kind of traumatized because of some PTSD and other stuff. And these kinds of things need to be addressed. Children definitely need to be, kind of not just monitored, but we need to design contents that are made for children. This is the biggest challenge, that children are now joining experiences that are just not made for them. They're watching all these awful things. The internet was bad enough, but this kind of constant reality capture and social VR is now able to introduce children to adults that don't have good intention. And also they're just falling, on their hands and feet and hazard and stuff. All these education has not happened. So basically just, virtual worlds are creating these new risks and challenges. And I'm just pointing out as a sort of takeaway for you guys to, and I want to leave plenty of room for question and answer after this, and I'll share some of the links as well. But this is a roundtable that we conducted in 2021, basically trying to attribute what those risks are at the global level and how data is potentially contributing and amplifying those risks. This is where we basically make recommendations. There is a report that you can download from xrsi.org, and I highly recommend it, because it really highlights what all could go wrong. And then we demand most of the governments to be making positioning statement that they will protect minorities such as myself. Because in this kind of a constant reality capture, if a certain regime or a person or whatever decides that these type of demographics is not really friendly or whatever, it could lead to genocide. And we've seen data leading to genocide. And then on top of that, this report also talks about neuro rights and whatnot. Another something that I think this is another event that XRSI is going to start doing. It's a series of events. It's an effort to ask people to not be users anymore, or to not be, not accept the notion of user. We should all be citizens. So what I say is, behind every avatar, there is likely a human being. And so if there is likely a human being, then we need human rights. We need neuro rights. And those rights must be extended all the way to the next iteration of the internet, which is why this is like a town hall series where we bring in regulators, global governments, big tech corporations, all of them together with civic organization, neutral grounds, just listen to people's concern. We've started this because if we're not going to allow people to express their concern, where are they going to go for their rights? They're just the users that anybody can flip the button and change the terms and conditions. And that's not the way we want to be treated in these new worlds. So what I would say, especially to any researchers in the room and anybody watching afterwards, is we can together sort of build this more respectful future where someone like myself doesn't have to fear for her life that I didn't check some boxes or do some configuration check and I already lost my privacy for that. So ultimate aim for us, for XR, should really be creating new worlds where people are not targeted, they're not harassed, and they're not murdered just because who they are or where they come from or who they choose to love or who they choose to pray. And it's all going to begin with demanding our rights, asking for the ability to choose beyond just this mandated login, mandated terms and services. It really starts with like owning ourselves, like, hey, we are human beings, we're citizens, we are not going to allow ourselves to be at the mercy of some organization that we just have to sign up for, and that could potentially lead to undermining democracy, genocide, and God knows at a personal level what all could happen. So I urge pretty much all of you, faculty, staff, researchers, this is a whole new era of research and a paradigm shift to kind of go to this next iteration of the internet. And that's why you are welcome to, connect with me and ask me today questions, but even just, all my information is right there. Reach out. Because we, as XRSI, we're trying to bring together a community of academics and researchers to really define what good should look like in the next iteration of the internet. And you all sort of have a role to play in that. So thank you. I'm really just, keen to listen to some of the questions and, have this interactive session. And thank you again for bringing me to have this chat with you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really enlightening. Like, as users, at this stage, we're thinking about what XR can do, but also we need to consider how it affects its users. So if you have any more questions, just drop them in the chat. I'm just gonna read the questions in the chat. So Kathy asked, how do you rein in, coordinate with all of the agencies, schools, corporate initiatives? How do you work with all of them?
So how do you bring in all these stakeholders together? We've kind of, how do you eat an elephant? It's like a metaphor. You don't eat elephant, but just, chunk it, So we've kind of divided our efforts into different focus areas. And then within that focus area, so for example, if we're trying to address the challenges of artificial intelligence algorithms with the different biases, we've created a coalition of CyberXR, which basically is a consortium of a lot of different organizations that are already doing diversity and inclusion stuff, but they're doing this kind of a effort in cybersecurity, or some people are doing in XR, that we just have made an effort to bring together that consortium to now work on the current standard. We actually put together the first standard that was for immersive technologies for global governments, and now we're working on the second standard for global governments, so they could create their positioning statement to protect minorities and that kind of stuff. So I think the answer really is you really have to divide and really segment what you want to focus on. I'm lucky I've been able to bring a very large community of researchers and academics, and they're my advisors and just stakeholders. And currently we're advising about 10 plus governments. Fairly recently, all the way at the Congress level, people are interfacing with us even at the White House level, some of the RFI for OSTP, Office of Science and Technology Policy. So wherever the opportunity presents, what we've decided to do is just like collaborate with tons of universities and academics and sort of dissipate those challenges so that everybody who is an expert in that or focusing on that could do that. And then we sort of wrap that up in our own research, whatever the outcome, and try to draw conclusions that could be used for regulation, that could be used for building frameworks, that could be used for, addressing novel ways of privacy. And there's lots to that. I didn't talk about, how we would address privacy, but there is just, just tremendous amount of information that you can curate when you do these community efforts. And that's how we're trying to tackle and address all of this.
Thank you. Second, Mohammed asked, how far off do you think we are from experiencing those VR XR security risks, like being able to tell exactly where you are, for example? And how do you think that might help push legislation forward?
So it really depends on your threat profile. And if, for example, when it was January, the day of insurrection, I basically was publicly, I was like, I'm in Turkey. And I even bought a ticket and I was just like nowhere to be seen because I personally did not feel safe. And likewise, so it depends on your threat profile. So if you are someone who is very, very important person, and it's a public knowledge that you're in virtual reality, a potential nation state actor with certain amount of effort could potentially still today determine where your pinky finger is when you're playing a video game. It could happen because there are novel ways, and there may be other ways that we don't even know. They call it zero-day vulnerabilities that can be exploited by those nation state hackers. Because, once you put those millions and billions of dollars to go after a person, you can't avoid that. So that mechanism to exploit somebody, it already exists. How quickly could it become ubiquitous? Look at Meta just, announced that they are Meta and they want to be a Metaverse company, and the anticipated timeline for all this to become a reality is between 5 to 10 years. And within that time, we got to figure out what the bad guys can figure out before the bad guys can figure out. So I feel like now is the time to do those proactive research and then figure out what all could go wrong. There are so many novel attacks that may not even have CVE, Common Vulnerability Exposure Index, assigned to them, but they exist. So it seems to me now is the time to investigate what that timeline could look like, but 5 to 10 years, and I don't have a crystal ball. I'm most interested in let's get these vulnerabilities and understand them.
Thank you. Another question, can you suggest strategies on how we protect citizens in immersive spaces while also developing therapeutic applications, especially for the disabled population that rely on biometrics to be effective?
And thank you so much for that question. And just like, I earlier said, how do you tackle all this? So we've divided into different focus areas. One of the focus areas is also medical XR. And so XRSI does have a medical XR council that specifically directly addresses this question. And so how can we build applications that potentially need your biometrically inferred data? And that's the thing. It's not that a broad regulation should apply and say, no, don't take this data, don't do this. What we really want to do, and this is where context is so important. The report that I talked about, the virtual world real risk, that talks about the context. And it also talks about the medical sort of use case and where the risks are. So I highly recommend you download it. But really, it's like in the medical context, you really need this data, not just for accessibility consideration, but for diagnosis. An artificial intelligence algorithm today could attribute whether somebody has a cancer or not, or early diagnosis, which a human can't. So we need this data. So based on the context, different mechanisms should be in place to safeguard that type of data in different contexts. So what I would like to do, the regulation could propose potentially that when you deal with EKG, EMG, all these behavioral biometric diagnosis type of information, that should not be allowed to go to the insurance provider. Give them what is necessary, but not the information that's not. So these kind of laws should exist in the United States and other countries as well. But also on the technical side, you could implement homomorphic encryption, where homomorphic encryption allows you to do compute on encrypted data. You could do privacy preserving technologies that differential privacy being one of them. So there are technical, there are administerial, like how do you handle data? And then there is these regulatory measures that can together safeguard the ecosystem. They actually facilitate the human rights that, you should get the medical coverage, you could get the medical diagnosis, but not let go of your rights of knowing where the data is going. Another one is actually Solid from Tim Berners-Lee's foundation. They are creating this new platform where your data is stored in different pods. And if a company is abusing your data, then you can kind of revoke the access to that, or you move the data from their pod, where it is housed. So there's several ways that are actually currently being discovered. Yesterday, Meta actually put out an RFI if anybody's interested, and not that, I don't really promote that you should research that. What I really would like to see is more research just in general. But yeah, they do a lot of research around these things too.
I'm seeing Emily's hand. Just to remind everyone, you can just unmute and ask your questions as well. Before going into the chat, I'm gonna let Emily ask her question.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I also wanted to make sure that there wasn't anybody who was here in Studio X who had a question. Did anyone have something? Okay, then I'm going to jump in. So I know that the EU, for example, has much better data privacy regulations than we do here in the States. I think about like the General Data Protection Regulation or the Right to be Forgotten policy. Are there any hopes, this is a big hope, that the global nature of many companies might lead us towards a broader application of these laws, so that we would in some respects be forced to adapt to the laws that are already existing in places like the EU?
So are you asking about we as in the United States, or are you asking about?
Sorry, since we're based here, I was thinking more of like, I know the EU has some better data protection laws than like the US does. And if we're dealing with developing things like Metaverse or that are global in nature, is there any hope that in order for things like Metaverse to be global in nature, that we would have the positive impact of some of the laws around privacy that exist in other places?
We really could. And actually, if there's so much that I do know, and I'm not at the moment privileged to say, but I, just in general, we do have hope. Also because a lot of these governments have really become alerted and started to pay attention. Many of the senators and different committees are reaching out directly to XRSI, all the way from the level of United Nations, as well as various other governments that are generally not really, proactive, like Saudi Arabia, for example. So there are several indicators that we may even have a global consortium at some point that may tackle this next iteration of the internet, as well as smart city efforts, as well as IoT type of stuff. Now, that is a very tough challenge to tackle, but I think there is real hope, and based on the things that I know, that it will actually, be addressed at the White House level, the Congress level. White House, actually, OSTP has been doing a lot of listening sessions. They've been inviting RFI from, organizations like ourselves to learn about biometrically inferred data, to learn about all these things. So it seems to me there's hope, but the only problem is when the reality happens, it's the bureaucracy. It's like we can't get a federal privacy law passed. So that's where the problem happens. Americans, like a lot of the, if you bring in the global, knowledge together, we can lead and we can solve these issues, but then we get stuck in legalities and bureaucracy and bipartisanship or not. And that's where there's going to be massive hurdles. And then every 4 years we change presidents. So it's like, one administration thinks this way. In fact, there were some lawsuits that were coming in 2020. And the moment administration changed, and those lawsuits were literally directed towards Oculus, and FTC kind of threw them out, and all these things were just gone overnight. And some of the things that we were even involved in. So, politics, bureaucracy, and that kind of stuff put together, it really is going to come down to civic organizations, sort of big tech working together, because if there is no trust in the platform, they can't make money. They can make X amount of people addicted, but the rest of the people are just not going to want to go to that platform. So the stakes are much higher now that they have to kind of go into proactive safety mode. They have to enable trust. Otherwise, you know what? I'm going to reject these type of glasses. And I'm going to be like, I'm going to go with Apple or something. And I'm pretty sure more alternative ecosystems would emerge as well. It's not just United States innovating. There's Korea, there's all these other countries. So knowing that, I think there is real hope that things are going to actually move in a positive direction, but really fast as well. Also, we have a precedent that we didn't do good of a job during the internet, when the internet was evolving. This is the next iteration of the internet. So we have lots of lessons that we can learn from. These congressional hearings that take place, they don't have to take place. We can now have those congressional hearings to learn what should be done instead of, hey, why was it not done? So I think there's definitely hope, I would say. At least I feel very hopeful. And I'm preparing for those days.
Thank you. Now that we're talking about, the responsibility that developers have, Wendy has a related question. They said that they are a big proponent of media literacy, but often fear that might allow the developers to place the responsibility of safe media interaction on the users. What do you think is the role of media literacy and how to balance those responsibilities?
So I think when it comes to media literacy, it's a shared responsibility. It's a shared responsibility from the developer's perspective, like to facilitate and allow the safety measures. It's an organization's responsibility to make sure that they have policies in place that push for these awareness and safety measures. But it is also a person who is like a consumer or individual kind of being around these technologies, because even if you don't like use these technologies as a user or a consumer, I hate the word user, but you just by being surrounded by these, just by being around somebody, your biometrics could be captured. Just by having that, glasses or something, or IoT sensors could combine all this data. So I think it's really just a shared responsibility. And I haven't really, English is not my first language. This does come to my mind as more like a bit more jargon, even though I'm like such a techie, but like the media literacy, what are we talking about? Are we talking about educating people to tell them what the risks are? Or are we talking about educating developers how they should code so they could proactively address the risk? I'm kind of trying to make sense. But regardless, it's just, kind of a shared responsibility where currently we don't have those things upfront given to developers. Like, here are the 10 things that you must not do to code better. We have it for traditional media, but we don't have it for Web3. We don't have it for all these other emerging technologies, which needs to be in place. I'm also happy to take questions afterwards, because just like I said, in terms of media literacy, I'm not the right person to even be answering this.
I was just going to say, I agree with you, because if you need to find a job through LinkedIn, knowing how LinkedIn uses their data doesn't necessarily protect you. Like, it's a collaboration, I guess, between two parties. On the chat, Katie is wondering, is there a way to monitor where one exists in the XR world, like a Google, LinkedIn credit report for one's identity?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. Is there a way to monitor where one exists in the XR world?
Is there a way to monitor? Yes, there is a way, especially if it's a closed ecosystem. Absolutely. This is actually building out to be what is called as a panopticon. And panopticon is just like a prison system where people feel like the guards are monitoring them. And because they are, as soon as you're on the internet, you have certain data that you're putting out there. Especially, you can't actually create an avatar without having some of the information, interactive information about the user or from the user or from the person who is, embodies as an avatar. So it is very much possible. And that's the danger. If it's, let's say, a closed environment, such as Facebook infrastructure, they even have a AI component that potentially monitors their own virtual reality environment. And they do this in the name of safety to enable safety. So any moment, if let's say sexual harassment is happening, you can potentially, and I'm talking about Horizon VR, so you can potentially press a button to summon a human cop or human person who will come in and sort of oversee your activity. You wouldn't see them, but they would be able to pretty much have the view that you have, like an egocentric view. So they would be able to see like what you see in virtual reality. And I would like to believe like this is also possible in augmented reality, because if there is a stream of data that is going back and forth, there is a lot of it that anybody can sort of do man in the middle type of a attack mechanism. And you don't have to attack when you are in a God mode per se, when you have access privileges that actually have much more, access to the data or modification of the code, then you can actually derive mechanisms that actually monitor you. Facebook already does that in VR, and somebody can potentially utilize it. And Facebook, we've known insiders from Facebook back in the days that they've used these type of mechanisms to like monitor their girlfriend or some kind of those type of cases have happened. So these mechanisms do exist, and they're going to become even more notorious. And that's why there is a larger push, and there should be a grassroots movement towards moving towards decentralized ecosystem, which has its own problems. But at least we are not at the mercy of these closed walled gardens, which constantly monitor you, maybe even collect all this data, predict it's, and this is the worst part. With the current type of AI tools, it's not even about whether they would predict that you have a disease or whether they would predict that you would do this. But based on that prediction, they could deny who you should be. So imagine I was a hairstylist, right? And if a predictive algorithm says that I'm never going to be anything else because, hey, English is not my first language. I'm just a hairstylist. I don't have any technical background. Maybe I wouldn't get a loan. Maybe I wouldn't be where I am, So these algorithms are now making decisions that will determine our future. And that is dangerous. And that's why, when people say, hey, monitor all the activities, it's possible and it's very dangerous because that same monitoring is now going into these AI algorithms, making decisions about you, predictions about you in the future.
Thank you. How there's a saying, if you're not paying for the product, you are for the product, you are the product. I guess that applies to XR as well, like you explained. I have a question for all students in this room, basically. I was going to ask if you have any advice for folks interested in working at the intersection of XR and cybersecurity, any skills, any connections they should make, things to pay attention to.
So, of course, I'm at the university, but I'm definitely going to talk about University of New Haven. I'm actually one of the board member for their Cybersecurity Institute. And I think at the moment, the intersection of XR and cybersecurity is more like in a research phase. So you can conduct research. And UNH actually has programs where even as an undergrad student, you can conduct research on these technologies. They're currently doing research on how they can hack brain-computer interfaces of different types. They were the first one to sort of do this novel, attack research. So research is definitely one of the avenues. But I think in the coming years, and in fact, I'm working on some of these projects as well, where you might have a credential from UNH or credential from certain university, XRSI style sort of certification that you could actually avail, where you learn about what that intersection of XR and cybersecurity looks like, because the emphasis is a little bit different, because it's not just like just like I said, not just node servers and your network, it's your brain. And that's where it gets really interesting, is now you're at some point, someday, we may even be able to upload and send data back to the brain and download and that kind of stuff. And what happens if there is a man in the middle because of that? So there's a lot of research type of work, George Washington University. I'm sure there are other universities that are doing so, but we aspire to communicate constantly with all the universities. In fact, here too is expanding this sort of a partnership. So when regulators or other big tech corporations that we consult and advise, we can all kind of pull in that knowledge to make that decision. So research is the one best way. Other than that, I would have to look up which are the organizations. I think Michigan maybe, but there is no such thing as like masters in cybersecurity and XR kind of thing at the moment. It's still like early days.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, we'd like to thank you, Kavya, for joining us. We are very grateful to have learned about your work. It was, again, really enlightening. Thank you also to everyone who attended. If you'd like to continue following Kavya's work, please visit her website, check her Twitter, LinkedIn. Links are in the chat. Please also check out the rest of the Voices of XR speaker series. Our next speaker is Dr. Masina Morris, next Friday at 1 p.m. She's the director of Morehouse in Metaverse, a VR project at Morehouse College. The links are also in the chat. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Nifli. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone.